Okay, hello everyone. I think we have 1 minute more to go, so let's just give it 1 more minute for others who are joining us. Okay, it's 4 o'clock, so we can start. Welcome to all our teachers and some diploma students and friends for joining today. Thank you for joining us today. We have with us John Gardyne and Karen Ryder from Trinity College London. They're in the academic team for Trinity, and we have requested them to do this webinar for us. It's on digital drama grades, managing the drama exams, the digital drama exams at home and in the classroom. I have muted all of our participants except for John and Karen, and I have asked you to switch off your video just so that we don't have any interruptions through the session. You can use the chat box if you have any questions that come up while the session is ongoing, and we will get to the questions at the end of the session. So having said that, John, would you like to introduce yourself? I know you've been to Sri Lanka a few times, so some of our teachers might know you or recognize you.
Yeah, oh no, not him again, I hear them say. But anyway, so yes, I'm John Gardyne. I've worked at Trinity for a number of years as an examiner, as a chief examiner, and as a member of the academic team in drama and performance. As of the beginning of this month, I've got a new role as well, which is really related to developing and pursuing more events of this sort for teachers and students around the world, both digitally and hopefully one day back in person. So this is what we're calling public engagement. So you are the first group of people who I am officially publicly engaging with in my new role. So there we are.
And I'm Karen Ryder. So I'm a drama teacher based in the northwest of England, and I've run my own drama school for almost 13 years now. And I've been entering students into Trinity examinations for approximately 11 years. I now work with Trinity as an education consultant, and I have also been teaching my students virtually online since March last year, and I can't wait to see them again.
Thank you. Thanks, John and Karen, for being with us. So let's get straight into it. So we're here to talk about digital exams. So tell us a little bit about digital exams and how are they different to a face-to-face experience?
Yeah, it's a huge subject, obviously. So what we're going to do in this webinar is we're going to focus mainly on the speech and drama syllabus and on individual exams in speech and drama. Only last week, new versions of all the digital syllabuses were put up on the website. We're not going to, which included information on pair and group exams. Now, we're not really going to talk about those today. I just flag up to you that there is a considerable amount of new material, including new guidance, now on the digital pages of the website. And one thing that you will find, which we'll touch on later today, is that all the guidance information that used to be in what was called the support guide has now been put into the syllabuses. So all the support material that you need for, say, speech and drama is now in the speech and drama digital syllabus, which hopefully means that you don't have to keep cross-referring between lots of different publications. Yes, so we're talking about digital exams today, and you know, COVID has caused lots of changes in our lives. And a thing that I mean, I'm stating the obvious here a bit, but it's right at the start. The important thing to be aware of is that digital exams in performance subjects, communication still is a bit different, are not a live experience. It's not like a Zoom call like this. You know, you're talking about pre-recording material, which is then assessed by an examiner at a later date. Trinity's response to COVID has been to try and make the content of the digital exams as close as possible to face-to-face exams that we're all familiar with. Typically the structure of graded exams and diplomas too have been 2, or in most cases 3 components. And if Renee, you could just put up a donut demonstrating that.
Yes.
There's here we go. So yeah, we have pieces, obviously, that we know all about. We have supporting tasks and reflective tasks. And it's important to just keep in mind the fact that each of those 3 different sections develops and requires the candidates to demonstrate different skills. I mean, they're interrelated, of course they are, and they combine to enrich the candidates' overall skills, but they are quite specific in terms of their assessment. Now, we know that in a face-to-face exam, in which all the components take place at the same time in the same room, the examiner is there and facilitates and guides the candidate through the various tasks, provides stimuli and materials when they're required, and makes sure that the candidate stays on track, as it were. In a digital exam, clearly that isn't possible. So we have to conduct each of those 3 sections or components in slightly different ways, which reflect the skills that are needed to succeed in them. But there are some very, very clear differences which you need to be aware of and adapt your teaching processes, your teaching approach throughout the preparation and recording process.
Okay, great. So let's get the first part, which is the performance pieces. So John, could you tell us a little bit about choosing performance pieces, and is it any different from a face-to-face exam?
Basically not. I mean, this is something that you will all be familiar with, you know, finding the right material for your students, matching them up to the grade and diploma that they're doing, making sure it's something they enjoy doing and can do well, and which feels like a useful and interesting experience for them. So that in terms of the selection, that's kind of exactly the same as we've always done. The big difference, obviously, is that at the end of the preparation process and rehearsal, and this is whether you're teaching in person or in Zoom or whatever, the pieces will not be performed live for an examiner, but will be filmed. And they need to be filmed in one single uninterrupted take as a continuous performance program. And sometimes we go, that seems a bit daunting, but if you think that's exactly what you do in a live exam, you go into your room for 15 minutes and you do 15 minutes worth of stuff. But we know that the whole idea of preparing for, and particularly being recorded for a performance, can bring its own stresses and strains and anxieties. And so we need, when we're working with our students, we need to find ways to reduce these as much as possible.
Yeah, so worst case scenario is going to be that you're back in a situation where you're not allowed as a teacher to be face-to-face with your students, and they're at home. You may be having to study and tutor them in an online format such as this. If this is the case, the student or the candidate may need the assistance of parents and carers to record their performances. So we're just planning for the worst case scenario. If this is the case, obviously it's going to be likely in a lockdown that a teacher and candidate will not be allowed in the same space due to what your legislation may be. So if this is the case, then it's important to include the parent or the carer in conversations so they know exactly what will be required of them, because there will be some things that they need to do. That will help them feel fully prepared, confident, and secure in the role that they may have to play. And it's just worth recognizing that this scenario may also have implications on the candidate's confidence. I'm sure if you've been teaching remotely, then you will have experienced that yourself, that initially students may become very different in their confidence levels because there's family members in the house, there's siblings nearby, and they just perform differently to a teacher than they would a family member. So as long as everyone involved is aware of this new potential situation, then we can put measures in place to overcome them. So allowing additional rehearsal time in the weeks prior to your exam, where the candidate performs their full exam in front of their parent or whoever it is that will be filming it. That way, their first time doing it isn't going to be the take that you need for your exam. Allowing for rehearsing in different rooms so that you can see which provides the strongest exam environment and is the most comfortable to the candidate. So for instance, if they've got a sibling who they quite easily get embarrassed in front of in the next room, they may not want to project, they may not want to give it their all. Make sure that the parent and the carer, as we've said, is fully aware of their role. They are there to film and facilitate the exam discussion questions only, just as an examiner would in a face-to-face exam. They are not there to start guiding and correcting the candidate or telling them how to perform. That is your job as a teacher. That is not their job as a carer or a parent. So it's reminding the candidate and the parent that the candidate is the drama expert in this situation, not the parent. The candidate is the one who has been in all the lessons. They know from their teacher how to perform the pieces. The parent does not. Of course, this isn't necessarily the case when lockdown eases, as I believe it has for you guys in Sri Lanka. So if teachers can share the same rehearsal space, some larger centres and schools will plan very definite days, weeks in advance, to accommodate the delivery of a specific theme of work or scheme of work. It may have to match in with term times, availability of premises, and of any additional support staff. But when you're starting to prepare, it's also important that smaller centres or people who are teaching individual candidates should still have that specific week or couple of weeks, just a period of time in mind that you're aiming towards to take your exam. Of course, when you reach that time, it's absolutely fine to delay it for a week or two if necessary, if you feel your candidate's not quite there. But just having that definite structure and schedule for the classes over a period of study, it is recommended so that you still have that focus of the work and you still have that sense of structure and sense of progression for the students.
Yeah, and one way that the digital sort of teaching environment can really help that is by continuing to film their work, you know, either on the camera you're going to work with or a tablet or whatever, so that, you know, the student gets used to the idea of the camera in the room. And just on that point, it's just important, I think, to stress that we've all been sitting here in front of computers talking over Zoom for a year and a bit now, and there's a sense in which our words can kind of shrink a bit down. That I'm looking just at people's heads, and you know, a little image of Karen there, a couple of inches high. And I've seen examples of work where people have sort of shrunk down their performances. So they sort of, oh, well, it's a bit like sort of TV close-up. And it's really important to be aware that filming a performance, it doesn't, you should still think of it as a live performance that you were doing in a bigger space. It's not, you're not playing to that little dot on the screen, you're actually sort of, as it were, inhabiting a space. And one thing that may help is having, even if you've just got a couple of chairs around the outside of the room, it may just take people away from, take your students away from that focus of just the camera. Because when we film this, we need the whole body to be in shot. You can't just have a sort of, you know, close-up head. So, and so they can engage physically with their work, not just vocally. And I would say also, as we just said, there's that thing, I think, that you just don't assume that you doing your performance live will automatically, or your students' performance will automatically translate in the same way into a two-dimensional digital image. You need to be able to get a sense of what you look like on camera so you can start to nuance and develop performance work.
Yeah, so it's about using the equipment, the camera, to explore and understand how to make the most of your performance and to make it engaging and interesting on film. So it's playing around with how much do you need to project vocally, depending on what room you're in. Obviously, this will impact it. What levels of physical engagement and movement enhance the performance most effectively? What's the best way of using the space that is available? And where does the performer need to be in relation to the camera? So all of those things, like John said, just play around with them so that you're not discovering those for the first time when you're actually filming your exam. If you're actually preparing for musical theatre exams, or maybe sometimes the performance art in some cases, you may also need to experiment with the sound balance between music and speech. So that may be whether it's played live or it's recorded. You don't need lots of different sophisticated equipment. It is just a matter of trial and error and finding the best approach with the technology you have available. Nobody's looking for a Steven Spielberg production or anything like that. But the biggest point to take is just don't leave it all till the last minute. Aim to build all of this into your whole preparation process so the candidate and the teacher aren't suddenly having to cope with all of these unknown elements on the day of your filming, because you're not going to want that stress at all.
So can I just add one point to that? I just saw a film the other day of a student, I think it was in Dubai, who was performing his pieces on the balcony of an apartment. And that was good, you know, because it gave him space to sort of reach out almost, and space to move around and everything else. Unfortunately, it was virtually inaudible because of the sound of wind on the camera. You couldn't hear a thing. So that's, I suppose, what we mean by just try it out first and see what the issues are likely to be.
That's a good point. And I think I should mention, John, I think all our teachers know, but we do have the option of coming into the center since the lockdown has eased in Sri Lanka, where students can opt to come into the center if they don't have access to a quiet room. And definitely if they want to come several times and do their own recording and try out the room, that is also an option that we could talk about. So please contact the office if you're interested in this option. Right, so let's move on to the supporting tasks, which are done very differently in the digital exams. So if you could explain to us the differences and how the supporting tasks should be handled.
Okay, so I think this is in some ways the area that people not had problems with, but that concerns have arisen, and people have wanted some more guidance on how to approach them. So if we go kind of back to basics, as it were, the purpose of the supporting tasks, sight reading, improvisation, storytelling, and so on, is to allow the candidate to demonstrate their imagination, their creativity, and their confidence. And in a face-to-face exam, the stimulus for that is, of course, given by the examiner, whether it's a piece of unseen text, sometimes verbal instructions, pictures, or whatever. Now, clearly, when the candidate aren't together in the room at the same time, that can't happen. But the same skills we're talking about, imagination, creativity, confidence, can still be demonstrated in a slightly different way, even when the candidate is given more time to prepare. So we're moving away from candidates giving a kind of spontaneous response to a stimulus to being able to demonstrating their ability to respond, but in a slightly different way. The stimuli for these tasks are published on the website every 2 weeks. Now, it used to be every week, now it's every 2 weeks, on Thursdays at 9 a.m. UK time. So I don't know if you could show us an example of that, Renew. And these are valid for 2 weeks. And your candidates, if they're going to use those particular stimuli, the recording has to be done during that period. So there you are. That's the stimuli for 8th to 21st of things. So if I was doing an exam today, but I could use those, I could choose those stimuli. What is it today? The 20th, yeah. So it'd be, but if I was going to do it later in the week, I would have to have uploaded a new set of stimuli for in this example, storytelling. So Karen, do you just want to talk a bit about preparing that?
Yeah, so if we move on to the storytelling, again, all the supporting material has, and for improvisation as well, although that's in acting, but all the supporting material has now been put into the new version of the digital syllabus on the website, so that you're not having to sort of cross-reference and look in lots of different documents. And it contains comprehensive information about the supporting tasks required, and it's got lots of other information in there as well. So each syllabus has its own relevant guidance for all of the graded exams. So if we're able to just scroll down to page 41, we can see the additional information of what the candidates should do and should not do, so what they're sort of looking to avoid. If you can actually just yeah, that shows that it's an updated version. So it's April 2021. So this is a brand new, hot off the press version with all the information in one place. So what we're going to do is just look at it just now. You can see all in one place. It's going to give you guidance as to what you're looking for your students, the things that they should be achieving, and the things that may be a trap that we might tend to fall into, but it's telling you how to avoid those and what you should be avoiding. So we're nearly there. Yeah, so it's just page 41.
So that's 40, yes.
Yep, so just down one more. There we go. So as you can see, it just shows you that candidates should be allowed to allow the skills that they have gained in their lessons, in their practice, to guide their work, rather than trying to remember a rehearsed scenario. So for instance, with storytelling, with the stimuli of a picture, you're not preparing a story as such. It's teaching them the skills on how to prepare a story and allowing them to actually experience that within the live recorded exam. We're encouraging them to explore the stimulus and find new ideas during the recording of their submission. So the danger is, if you have a prepared story, if you've got a picture of a man kicking a football and you've prepared a story, that then becomes a prepared piece, because the student knows exactly what they're going to say, and you're missing the skills that you're looking for. So if they've got the skills of improvisation and storytelling, then new ideas that may just come into their head during the recording is great. That will show, and that's what we're looking for. So it's challenging themselves to work within that live moment and embracing the element of surprise as they creatively explore the material, not shying away from it because it's not what they practiced.
Yeah,
so therefore, they should avoid fixing or polishing that final piece for assessment and being concerned over mistakes, that they think are mistakes, or the piece taking a new path, because that is exactly what live performance is.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, for instance, it just struck me that an example might be, you might be saying, it's about the day you're doing the recording, isn't it? Because you might say one day he went out into the field and there was a terrible rainstorm, just like today. You know, it would be like, it wasn't raining yesterday, so I tell the story in a slightly different way yesterday. But today, I respond to the moment I'm in and be prepared to sort of walk down those paths a little bit. And I think that would be really gratifying to see in students' work. We're aware that this is a really, really big change. This is the idea of students being given stimulus material in advance. And of course, we're also aware that, you know, instinctively teachers may want to say, oh, great, this is no longer a sort of terrifying unknown. This is something that we could practice a lot in order to get a better mark. And I think perhaps that's most, the point at which that is kind of most noticeable or most sort of evident is in sight reading. Because obviously, that's what has happened in the past is the examiner gives them a piece of sight reading and they read it. What I don't think helps us is the term sight reading, because that means something specific, particularly in music. And you'll see that now the task has been slightly renamed, read at sight a passage. What are the skills we're talking about? Well, lifting a text off a page, not struggling with something you've never seen before, but you know, like it is when you read stories to your children and things like that, you're kind of you're familiar with it, but the skill is not rehearsing the same bit of the story over and over and over again before you read it to your child. It's more to do with having the ability to read, you know, I'm not saying more or less spontaneously. Of course, students will have looked at the pieces and probably have practiced them a few times. But I think we talked earlier about different parts of the exam focusing on specific different skills. And there's a danger that if you kind of overwork the piece that's presented for sight reading, even start to kind of memorize it, it becomes a pre-rehearsed, pre-memorized performance, just like the other prepared pieces. So it's possible that if in over-preparing a piece of text in this way, there's a danger you're undervaluing the skills that we hope the candidate will develop. And it might be that may in turn lead them to get a slightly lower mark because they're not demonstrating the sort of spontaneous, semi-spontaneous reading skills we're talking about. And over-preparation, as Karen has said, you know, can have a similar impact on storytelling, on improvisation, in acting, performance modification, and other supporting tasks.
Yeah, so it's the preparation that we're looking at. So of course, you're engaging teachers and candidates to practice the skills of reading aloud and improvisation and things like that. And it's, as John said, it's as you would if you're reading a story to your child. You can look at them just making sure that they've got the vocal skills that they need in there, and looking for describing words. So if someone says, she said it angrily, they say it angrily. So it's teaching them those skills rather than really preparing the piece. You can practice this because weekly materials and stimuli are posted on the Trinity website. You can download them. So download them and use them as a valuable and adaptable and free resource that will support and help teach those skills. So ultimately, it's focusing preparation on the skill building rather than overworking one specific piece of text or improvisation. This is going to provide you with a much, much richer and more stimulating learning experience for everybody. And it is going to lead to a stronger, more confident outcome in the exam and more of the skills as to what the examiner is actually looking for.
Great. Thank you. That's a really interesting point, Karen, that teachers could go on the website and download the bi-weekly stimuli and practice with that. Yeah, that's really great. So that brings us to the final section of the donut, the reflective task. I'm going to just put it up one more time. If you could tell us what is expected here in the reflection task.
Okay, so as I'm sure you're aware that apart from a few group exams, almost all Trinity exams have a reflective discussion component. And the point of that really is that candidates can engage in discussion with the examiner to explain and analyze, depending on what level there are, their performance choices, their knowledge of context, their knowledge of poetry, the relevant information that has helped them to prepare. And in a face-to-face exam, while the general areas of discussion at each grade are listed in the syllabus, the candidate doesn't know exactly how the examiner might phrase that question or which piece they might particularly ask about. So the objective of this task in digital format is to give the candidates an opportunity, as I say, to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of their performed pieces and the relevant aspects of performance skills, exactly the same as in a face-to-face exam.
Yeah, exactly. So this requirement is completely unchanged in the digital exams. And yes, the examiner and candidate are not in the same room. So therefore, there are some slight adaptations into how this part of the exam does have to be conducted for obvious reasons. So as with the supporting tasks, the stimuli that will enable the candidates to fulfill the task and obviously support their response are now provided in advance, as John has said. So you will be able to find those questions in the digital syllabus, and all the relevant questions for each grade are in each relevant syllabus.
Yeah, yes. I mean, the important difference between the supporting task stimuli and the reflective task questions are that the questions for reflective tasks do not change week by week or every 2 weeks. They are the same and will apply in, I mean, they stay that will, sorry, I'm not being very lucid, but they will stay the same for the foreseeable future as published in the syllabus. So if we look at, could you just move that down one bit further so we see the grade 3 one there? Thank you. So let's look at that grade 3 as an example. And you'll see that those areas for discussion are fairly general. And what we would hope is that during the preparation, the teachers would use all of those questions or want to talk about all those areas with students to find out, to kind of encourage their understanding and interest in the work they're doing. But the actual examination, as you'll see there, the candidate, in this case, grade 3, chooses 2 or 3 of the following questions to respond to. And at lower grades, the teacher or caregiver, whoever's in the room with the students, can read out those stories. But obviously, again, it's if you for instance, if you look at that first question, how do you feel your performance went? What were you most pleased with? If you were doing it in an exam, you'd be reflecting on the exam, on the performances you've just given. So you might say, well, I like that poem. I kind of think I went a bit fast in the middle bit of it, but I thought I really nailed the ending. But you might want to encourage your students to have the ability to discuss spontaneously the work they've done, as well as obviously having, being able to talk about how they prepared. How, for instance, that last one, how were your performances different from one another? And that kind of discussion and reflection as a classroom activity at all levels will significantly enhance the students' skills in that area and make them articulate, spontaneous speakers, as well as also preparing them for the exam.
Yeah, so obviously we recognise that the young and more inexperienced candidates at the lower exam levels or initial grades will require support and structuring during this exam. So you can ask whoever is doing the filming to actually ask the questions for them, put the questions to them. However, as the students gain in confidence, maturity and exam level, they should identify and read out the questions they're responding to themselves, and that should form part of their overall response to the task. Candidates should avoid reading responses from full written notes, because if that happens, again, you're going back into something's prepared. There's not a real reflection of what you've actually just done. It's a reflection of what you prepared, if that makes sense. If it happens, obviously the personal reaction to exactly what's just happened isn't going to be evident, and that is what the examiner is going to be looking for marking. So any notes should just be written in the form of keywords or phrases, just to sort of prompt the students that they may want to talk about vocal delivery, they may want to talk about movement or the space available to them or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think there's 2 other points we could make about the reflective task. And these are really about developing quite sophisticated communication skills, even in young candidates. Because obviously when we do, in a face-to-face exam, that discussion is facilitated by the examiner, and the examiner kind of keeps it time and moves it on and knows when to ask a follow-up question and so on. In digital exams, it's the candidate is in control of the timing. I'm now going to speak for 60 or 75 or 90 seconds about, say, question 4, describe the imaginary surroundings in one of your places. So as part of your preparation, I'm not saying learn it, but get a sense of what's it feel like to talk for about 1.5 minutes about something. And also, this isn't a punishment, it's not like, oh God, how am I ever going to fill up 90 seconds? The more personal insights that a candidate can give, the more likely they are to score highly. So for instance, if you're answering a question on how did you put your program together, don't waste time listing the pieces you've just done. Well, first I did this bit from Hamlet, and then I did such and such a poem, and then I did this extract from Roald Dahl. That's all wasting time. The examiner knows what you did. so that information is redundant. Use it, use your time effectively to give your real response to it, rather than feel that it's something, it's just time I can fill in.
Yeah, so carrying on with that idea of using your time effectively, candidates are given a choice of how many questions they respond to in the exam. So they might be told you can answer, say, 3 or 4 questions. Sometimes, as a teacher, the immediate tendency may be to encourage the student to answer 4 questions, so that you've got that safety net. If you answer 1 quite badly, we've got another one to make up the marks. In the written exams, obviously, students are encouraged to use the full time of the answer. And we do sort of encourage you to do that, as John said, in an effective way, with the vocal responses as well. With the digital exams, it's the depth of the response that the examiner is marking. So 3 considered perceptive and detailed responses will actually be more effectively demonstrating the skills that you've learned and their understanding than 4 shorter, possibly more superficial answers would, because you do still have that set time limit. So remember that reading out the questions themselves does form and take up some of the time available. So what we're trying to say is that there's absolutely no guarantee that by answering 4 questions, so you have that safety net, is actually going to lead to a higher mark, because in doing so, you're actually unable to give, you've got less time for each question, so you're unable to give a more detailed response. One of the things that has come up is that candidates and teachers have been getting the feedback that their response needed to have more detail in it. And this is exactly what we mean. So if you've only got time to answer questions shortly, the detail's not going to be there. One of the things that they may be looking for when they're saying about detail is it's about giving examples and responses to the actual piece that you've just done. So if you're asked, how did you prepare for this piece? And a candidate gives an example of, well, I turned up to lessons every week. I learned a little bit about the playwright. I read the story. I learned about my character and my character's objectives. There's no detail. So what did you learn about the character's objectives? For example, I learned that my character was determined that they were going to win this race and they were going to do it by whatever means necessary. And you could see that by the way that they said such a line. And I demonstrated that by using projection to show I really meant it. So I'm giving detail. I'm not just saying there was an objective and I learned what it was. Well, this was the objective and this is how I demonstrated it. I'm reflecting on what I did. I'm not just giving information on the story. So 4 or 5 minutes may feel like a long time to talk about your ideas on camera, but when you start putting those details in, 4 or 5 minutes is not a long time at all. So use it effectively and use it well.
Good. Excellent. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and we'll move on to the exam day. So how do we make candidates feel special on the exam day? Because obviously this is very different in a face-to-face environment. So if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yes, as you're right. I mean, exam days, in a face-to-face exam, they've been in the diary for months. It's a red letter day, it's kind of an exciting, unusual event, particularly if you're going to a centre where there may be costumes and makeup, quiet please posters and all that. Of course, in your context, my understanding is that you're more likely to be going into centres with your students and scheduling more like a typical face-to-face exam day. It's obviously different if people are filming at home or having to just perform in their bedroom or something, because that's very anticlimactic. It just feels like I'm just doing the same material I've practiced a lot in familiar surroundings, and the performance doesn't have an audience. You know, it's watched later by an examiner who may be thousands of miles away.
Yeah, so it's just going back to what we were discussing earlier, that it's about making this idea stand out. And obviously a lot of you are able to go into your centres now, so that will feel somewhat different. But again, if that's where they're going and rehearsing, it is still going to feel just like another rehearsal. So there are a few things that you may want to do to differentiate the recording day from your other days. So you may want to dress up specially for the event. You may want to use props and costumes. Obviously, that depends on what you're doing, the age and the inclination of your students. You may want to send invites or speak to the parents or the carers, so that there is that sense of closure afterwards. So can they maybe still go out for a treat afterwards, or can there be a celebration, or do you have, they don't have to be the Trinity stickers, but like they do in Young Performers, but do you have stickers for younger candidates that you can give them to say well done, anything like that? Because remember, with you, if you're hosting your own centre, you're actually not going to be getting your exam results on the day as you usually would. So it's just about whatever works within you and your students, finding something to differentiate it from every other day and going in there. It will feel strange for everyone, but you can make it separate and different.
Okay. Great points. And that brings us to the filming of the actual performance. Could you sort of tell us where would be a good place to film? I know you talked about the room, but also just generally more information about filming the performance.
Yes, well, as we've mentioned, that the requirement is for each submission must be a single uninterrupted single take of the whole content of the exam, the rehearsal, the performance pieces, the supporting task, and the reflective tasks. And there is a film on the website, a short film, which gives some more practical guidance on filming. I would say that, you know, as we said earlier, in a face-to-face exam, you have the examiner in the room sort of facilitating the experience. And it has always been a rule that teachers and other people aren't allowed in it, except occasionally for accompanists, for musical theatre or technicians sometimes. That's different here because obviously somebody has to be there in the room with the student to get the filming done. And that may be a teacher, it may be a technician, it may be another responsible adult. In a home setting, it's probably likely going to be the parent. And when you're setting that up, in the absence of an examiner, it's very important to define who is fulfilling that examiner stroke facilitator role, and everyone should understand what that means. So, for instance, once the candidate is all ready to begin, or you check your camera is working and so on, somebody as it needs to be the director, if you like, so well, we start now. And what you don't want is lots of other people chipping in and trying to prompt or help or something. As we said earlier, the candidates need to have a sense they're performing beyond the camera, bigger space to a bigger audience. And again, a few chairs around the side of the room might help that, just so they're not trapped in the focus of the camera.
Yeah, so just to reiterate that point again, the camera is to be seen as one member of the audience, not the only member of the audience. So you still need to be playing to the room, not just to the camera. And with the filming, even though it must be continuous, it is okay for the candidates to take a short break between the pieces, you know, whether that be that they need to just do some breathing, take a drink of water, get a new prop, or whatever it is, just that break to differentiate between each piece. The break doesn't mean a break in pausing and filming of the camera. So if the candidate's having a drink of water, that will be filmed, that will be visible. And it's also fine for the facilitator to guide the candidate onto the next task at the younger levels, just as the examiner would in a face-to-face exam. And again, if the facilitator sees that the candidate is getting a little bit flustered or anxious, it's okay for them to guide and allow the candidate to suggest to the candidate, that they just take that moment, just so that that candidate feels supported throughout. So yeah, it's just about taking that short break between each task, particularly between the performance pieces and the supporting tasks and the reflective tasks, so that we can see that there's those three separate areas. We've seen that there's different skills involved in these. Therefore, there's going to be a different energy level that is required for each of these. So yeah, and as we've said, the facilitator can guide that and even introduce the questions for the reflective tasks when needed. So as we know, performing from memory is demanding and it is a challenging activity. It doesn't matter how well prepared a candidate may be, everybody has the occasional lapse of memory. They might hesitate, momentarily forget lines, miss words out, all of that. We know that this happens. So if it happens right at the start of the recording, the candidate or the facilitator may suggest that the filming is stopped, the candidate is given that moment to refocus, take a deep breath, and they start again. However, the danger is that you might want to keep doing this. So it's worth considering that as the exam progresses and hopefully the candidate gets into their confidence stride, it is preferable not to stop the recording unless, of course, the candidate has some sort of, real anxious meltdown, or there's a technical or even a health and safety issue that means obviously it cannot be continued.
Yeah, I mean, we all, teachers and parents and everyone, we all want our candidates to perform as well as possible. But it's worth remembering that, you know, it's a fundamental fact that every single live performance is different and unique and should be celebrated as such. There's no sort of perfect performance which the candidate may achieve. So as Karen says, you have the odd prompt, the odd dry, some slight inaccuracies. That's all part of live theatre. And if a candidate dries 3/4 of the way through their last piece, do you really want to have to go right back and start all over again? And there will be times when doing a retake is the best option. And it needs to be clear who's making that call. The facilitator, or who is saying, stop, we're going to retake. But resetting and refilming has all kinds of its own stresses and strains, and it can make performers feel insecure, it can mess up with your scheduling, it uses up extra time and energy. And so, I think that there's that sense that you just go for it, really. And because, you know, at the end of a face-to-face exam, we know the candidate can walk out of the room and they go, oh, it's done, you know, no matter how well or badly they feel it may have gone. It's different in a recording because you always say, oh, if only I hadn't done that, you know, and want to do it again. But that can lead to strange feelings, Karen, can't it?
Yeah, it can. So obviously, if there's really the need to do a retake without overstressing the candidate or messing up your schedule, maybe you could do it on another day when the dust has settled, then in some cases, yes, that would be preferable. But basically what we're saying is that always be aware that no matter how many times you do a take, there's no guarantee that that 100th take is going to be any better or more representative of the candidate than the first one. Because one piece might have been brilliant and then the third piece was okay. Then you do another one and it's switched. So there's just never any guarantee. So it is about capturing that live performance.
Yes, I have to say on a personal note, my daughter did a recorded exam last summer, and I have to say, filming it was probably the most anxious, nerve-wracking experience of my entire life. So I appreciate what students and parents are going through in that situation.
That's true. You're right, John. I had to do a similar recording for my daughter too, so it was very stressful. Okay, so moving on to checking your recordings and also submitting entries. Well, if I could just say about submitting entries, we have done a couple of sessions, and I'm sure you've all heard my very boring presentation about how to enter for a digital exam. But if anyone has missed that information or needs that information sent to you again, you most certainly can contact the Sri Lanka office for entry forms, fee scales, timelines, etc. But we have very flexible timelines for the digital exams. So please contact us. We will be putting up a slide with all our contact information just in case you have missed it. So, you know, you can take that down. So John, do you have anything to add on checking the film before they submit?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing to do is check the technical issues. Check it's the boy on the Dubai balcony. Check that it's not a windy day and actually you can't hear a thing. I don't think it's, you know, it may not be entirely constructive to kind of watch and re-watch the film exhaustively trying to spot mistakes, as it were. You just want to think, well, if you're hypercritical, you will always find something to criticize. Sometimes candidates and parents don't want to see the recording. Teachers often do, because obviously, if only to reassure themselves that the students have given a good account of themselves. But it's that thing about, can you say, right, that's it done, finished, you don't need to retake, and as Karen says, that's when you go out and do the school.
Yeah, so, and again, just going back to that idea of when you've finished a face-to-face exam, you can get that sense of euphoria, you know, like an actor after a first night, and it's like, yes, I did it after all that rehearsal, all that work, I've finally done it. And as we said, if you are a private centre and you receive your exam results on the same day, that's heightened. It's an even bigger sense of achievement. So the danger, obviously, as we've said, is with the digital exams, this doesn't happen. So there could just be that flat feeling. And what we don't want is the students to think, oh, well, that's it. Well, okay. We don't want to put them off. We want them to still feel excited. We don't want them to feel that the experience is incomplete. So it's just about trying to find that closure of the whole experience, to celebrate their achievements, but also to encourage them to look forward to future challenges with Trinity as well.
Yeah, and I think that's it really. You need a round of applause. Don't you? I mean, even if we're talking a metaphorical round of applause, it's very often that candidates get that to feel right. I've had that reward. I'm ready to move on and to whatever comes next, and hopefully that will be exploring further their performance skills as they grow and provide them with future challenges.
Good. So we can quickly take a few questions. We're coming up on our 1 hour. John,
yeah.
I'm also going to put up the contact slide so that if anyone has missed it, you can take down our contact information. There is one question here from Wasna who asks if If a candidate forgets their lines mid-performance, is the facilitator allowed to remind them of their lines?
Well, prompt them, basically.
Prompt
yes,
them.
that is what the examiner would do.
Okay.
If you imagine that the examiner would want to help the candidate to move on. There's a difference between the facilitator giving them, you know, just getting them over a difficult moment and helping them move on, and a student who is clearly unprepared and hasn't really learned it properly. So I think that that's the sense that, yeah, the facilitator is there to support in the same way as the examiner. And, you know, one of the examiner's jobs is to provide prompts if required. But there's a point at which excessive prompting implies insufficient preparation. It's better to take a prompt than feel you've got to stop and start all over again.
Okay, good. If there are any other questions, you can just pop it on the screen, but I think you can also, if anyone prefers to ask it live, you can unmute and ask the question as well. There was
I am Shara. I'm
sorry,
Shara.
go ahead, Shara.
Yeah, I want to just clarify about how the timing is done for ATCL public speaking. Is it individual speeches timed at 5 minutes each, or is it a total of 25, the performance recording?
Yes, that's, well, the overall performance, I mean, you would do that as a series of, as an uninterrupted film, you know, it would be the same. You would do the 5 presentations. What we have always said is that any change around or move around time must be accommodated within the overall period for recordings. So if, for instance, you need to pick up a new prop, to change, to refocus a bit, you should aim to be doing an overall film of 25 minutes. In practice, given the additional pressures of digital, I would imagine there would be some leeway given by the assessors. What you don't want to have is the examination performance time is the time that you're allowed. So you need to really think that in order to achieve everything I'm achieving with my performance program, it needs to fit in 25 minutes. And that may mean you having to have slightly short, you know, 10 seconds almost to move from one piece to another.
Okay. Shara, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. I think Shara had also sent in the question beforehand about using props and the timing of that, John. I asked John that about that before, and he did say that the moving of props or stools or whatever should be taken into the time of the performance as well. And it's the same in the face-to-face scenario. Is that correct, John?
Yeah, exactly the same.
Exactly the same. Okay. Are there any other questions? There was a question about group exams, and as I mentioned at the beginning, yes, we have just introduced the group exams, and they have been included in the new syllabuses that have been uploaded online, but we won't be touching on them right now because we haven't started taking entries for those exams yet. But we hopefully, if you all found this interesting and useful, we will do a follow-up session with the new syllabuses that are out and the new exams that are out. There is a question from Delaney: should the candidates still introduce their pieces before each performance?
Yes, absolutely they should.
Yes.
And also, of course, they need to provide the text for each one of their performance pieces. You can do it in any order you want, of course, as long as that's the order of the submission form. So you don't, if the syllabus says poem, prose, and a piece of a play, you don't have to do that, but it just needs to be very clear which which piece is being done when. In the case of this poor boy on his Dubai balcony, so he's not going back in, it was impossible to tell which piece was which sometimes because the background noise was so, you know, loud. But but yes, definitely you should identify the piece before you start. And it may be, you know, as I said, that you want to finish one piece, take a moment, and use announcing the title as a sort of start. You know, now I'm going to do this. Hamlet by William Shakespeare, and off we go. It can re-energize you in a way, or you can use it to re-energize you in a way if you like.
Good. Thank you. Okay. There aren't any other questions on the chat. Anyone else for one last question? We're about 5 minutes over. We were trying to keep it to 1 hour. So if anyone has one last question, we could take it. No? Okay, that's great. So that's not too bad, John. 5-5.
Yeah.
And we have Romola here to say hello. John was asking about Romola too. So
hello, John. Nice.
Hello, Romola. Nice to see you.
Yes,
and all
nice
other teachers. There are about 50 teachers,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah, hello to all the teachers who have joined in this webinar. I was watching it at some other place. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. Thank you so much, both of you, for having, you know, done this for us. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you,
Let's hopefully we'll do, this won't be the first and last one of these. Let's look forward to moving forward and really keen to kind of engage in this kind of dialogue with everyone, because I think it's to everyone's benefit, ourselves included, to get that contact and feedback from teachers in the field.
Yes, it was very useful. I think we have about 50, a little bit over 50 participants. So that was, thank you to all the teachers for joining in. And oh, goodness me, there's questions coming in now, but maybe I could send these to you, John. And do you mind answering them, or do you have 5 minutes to answer them?
I can very quickly, those two I've just seen. Yes, okay. Communication skills. Exams are being done a completely different way, and yes, that is a different area, and we would I'm sure we will be putting together a similar webinar on those. And I saw there was another question there about reportage, which sometimes comes up. I mean, this is a term which is used in Europe. I don't know how current it is in your part of the world. But basically, it's eyewitness accounts. You know, you can find like someone who was at the Battle of Waterloo, describing what it was like that, or I don't know, coronation of Elizabeth II or whatever it was. I mean, that's the quickest way to do it. It's someone reporting what they saw. There's a couple of collections of reportage. I know Faber do one. And I think Oxford do one as well. You know, quite fascinating pieces as well. And it's just another kind of, it's, as I say, a first-hand account of an event.
Okay. And also about, should the candidate read out the unseen text before answering the questions? That's in grade 7 and 8, I think.
There's actually some quite detailed guidance in the new syllabus, which provides a lot of scaffolding and structure for those tasks. So I'll just refer you to that for those grade 7 and 8 things, which I think is new in the new syllabus and will be of great assistance. Okay,
very good. Okay, well, I'll end there. Thank you very much. And we look forward to a series of webinars going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that.
Thank you, everyone.
And on behalf of Karen and myself, thank you all for your time and attention. And one day we'll all see each other in the real world again.
Yes.
That won't be before too long.
Yes, yes, I hope so. Yes.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right then.
Bye.
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 Bye. Okay. Bye.